Alex here again with another image review session. I'm looking at a batch of images from my recent trip to Lembeh. This was actually one of 3 batches of images I processed during the last week, and I split them up into 3 videos just because there was a lot of images. And these are images from the Lembeh trip, but from the second half of the trip, just in terms of the number of images I'd processed early on. So there's pictures here taken with the MWL, some more pictures with that vortex filter that I've posted about online that people are interested in. Mostly though pictures with a 90mm. There's yeah, and some with the 50mm as well, and then some more MWL ones. So we'll have a quick look through these. So first up is this Tazuma shrimp, which I like this picture just because Tazuma shrimps are quite restrictive photographically for underwater photographers. They're cool creatures, but their shape means that they're long and thin and don't really fill the frame ever. So we usually shoot them in a pretty similar way with them as a macro subject with a little bit of surroundings in them. And I thought it was really nice to have a picture showing actually what one is like in terms of where it really lives, rather than just a close-up of it on a sponge. So this was a really nice Tazuma shrimp, lovely orange colour, sitting on an orange sponge. And anyone who's familiar with Lembeh can probably guess the area that this is in that kind of traditional police pier, Bianca, Tenderussa area on the mainland side, which always seems to be dominated by orange, small little orange sponges, and you get lots of orange frogfish in there, and in this case an orange ocellated Tazuma shrimp, or saw blade blade shrimp, which I really like this shot just with the little feeling of the background that you get looking up the slope with the sponges overhanging and that sort of thing. So just nice pleasing little shot on f/16 at a 50th of a second to get that blue in. It was a nice sunny afternoon, so I didn't have to go too slow on the shutter speeds. This is the same dive, but it clouded over, so I was now at f/16 at a 15th of a second, just with the darker water and also not such an upward camera angle. But I really like this type of use of the EMWL, of really getting the lens into places you just couldn't get a lens otherwise, and I think this is often its best use. And obviously with a soft tentacled animal like this mushroom coral and the mushroom coral shrimp inside it, it was really a good opportunity for one of these types of pictures that really takes you right down to the level. And I really liked the way that the tips of these tentacles look in the picture. I think they look really cool, and I thought they made quite a strong graphic element to the top of the picture with the connection with the creature, that the shrimp that lives in amongst those tentacles at the bottom of the frame. Right, next picture is another mushroom coral, possibly even the same one, but this time while hunting around in amongst the tentacles I found this little sexy shrimp, or spotted cleaner shrimp, whatever they're called, other names for them. And it was just a nice chance to shoot one of these with that same setup. This one here, I wasn't able to hold the camera quite as still, so it's a little bit more blurry away from the flash. It's probably the same setting. It's as slow as an eighth now, just to get that blue background coming through. But I think that's so important when shooting with the EMWL is you don't generally want to shoot the EMWL on a fast shutter speed and just shoot black backgrounds. It's much more interesting when you just have that little bit of blue coming through, giving that feeling of depth. But with the sexy shrimp, I obviously wanted to not go. I didn't have much because I knew I was on such a slow exposure. I didn't dare to have as much blue as in the previous 2 pictures because I knew it would be all quite blurry. And then just to go against what I've just said, this is an EMWL shot, but this time taken at night on a night dive with a black background. And I have to say, I really enjoyed the MWL on this night dive. It was on one of the muck sites. It was at Jahia, which is a popular night dive for Lembeh Resort, because it's nice and sheltered, it's full of critters, and it's really reasonably close to the resort. And on this night, it was just ridiculous. We had quite a lot of us in the water, so I think we had about 4 different dive guides in, and they were just finding subjects absolutely everywhere. I must have photographed about 80 different animals on this dive. It was just absolutely crazy. And the MWL at night was perfect for all of them, and it's obviously very easy to shoot the MWL when it's shot on a fast shutter speed. Probably shot this on a 200th because I just had it on an electronic shutter at a 200th. That was enough to control the light down at ISO 100. Lots of strobe, plenty of strobe light when you're that close, so just shot with a closed down aperture. And I was able to shoot a whole range of subjects. We saw at least 2 stargazers on that dive and lots of frogfish and all the normal stuff you'd expect on a sort of night muck dive. Devil scorpion fish, lots of hermit crabs running around, another scorpion fish, and all those subjects work really well with the MWL, and I do need to get on and process some of those, because although I don't like the MWL with the black background, it is quite nice to have a few shots of it with the black background, and obviously they're super sharp because of the fact they haven't got that any blur on them. This is a coral hermit. So these are the small hermit crabs. They've long been a favourite subject of mine. These are the small hermit crabs that live in holes in the reef rather than dragging a shell around with them. And they reach out with their feeding apparatus and strain food from the water. And these ones, there's several types in Lembeh. And there's quite a few, they're quite a common subject. But I'm always looking for them with a good background. They kind of don't vary much, picture to picture, but where they're living really does vary. And this one was super nice. It's at Newley Falls. It's in shallow water, easy to find. Lots of people photograph this particular one. But it's very nice because the hole is completely surrounded by this pinky purple sponge, often called coral eating sponge, because it sort of tends to take over with dead corals. You also get it a lot on jetty legs, sort of in Rajarampat. They're often covered in this sponge, and again, it just makes a really cool, graphic, and interesting and colourful background. And these guys have cute little eyes. You can see there if I zoom in. They've got these kind of striped eye stalks and then spotty eyes at the end, which kind of they always remind me of like sticks of rock that you get at the seaside in the UK with the stripes on the outside, and then when you see what's inside, you get all the colours. So yeah, with this stick of rock eyes. Right. Let's go back to the grid. The next three pictures are all pictures taken on the same dive with the vortex filter that I've posted about on social media and shared links to for those interested. The one thing I wanted to say about this is it's a cool effect. No doubt. These are just standard shots, but with the filter on the front of the camera, used outside the housing so I could take it on and off during the dive. I could get these very cool and very different effects, and it gives different effects depending on the layout of the subject and the background. But I really like these. I wouldn't obviously want a whole portfolio of these shots. I think I shared... Oops, sorry, it's open in Photoshop. I wouldn't necessarily, claim that this is the be-all and end-all in underwater photography creativity. It's just screwing on a cheap filter. But I have to say now, there are so many of these different effect filters available. I've been pointing people and just say, go on Amazon and search photography effect filters, and you'll just see endless ones of these. And I didn't choose this one because anyone recommended it to me. I didn't know anyone. I don't think no one I was aware has ever used this filter before underwater. But there are tons and tons of them, and different people have tried different ones at different times. And I think they're a fun thing to try. So the one I used was called a vortex filter. You're welcome to try that one. But I'd really encourage people to go and just go through them and see what the effects they give, and then think, oh yeah, I could use that this way, and try that one. This was only about £25 to buy, so it's a relatively cheap, fairly disposable item on a trip like this, and it was good fun to use, and it's still in good condition, and I'll probably take it to the Red Sea and try it there as well a little bit. But I definitely wouldn't overdo it. I've processed quite a lot of pictures from it just to show people, but ultimately I only used it for probably about 30 minutes during the whole trip. I've processed a high proportion of those pictures for now. This pipefish was on the same dive, so it was actually right next to the anemone actually where I was shooting these. It's probably only taken a couple of minutes away from. I never found the shooting time on these when I looked for it, but it was taken at a very similar time to the saddleback anemone fish we were just looking at, and this beautiful pipefish is lovely and lovely. Just zoom in on his face. Very beautiful little pipefish, and I shot this guy at f5.6 to blur the sponge, and I actually waited for him to swim in front of that sponge so I could get that nice elephant ear sponge out of focus as a backdrop behind him. To provide a nice clean image. Pipefish are difficult to shoot as an underwater photographer just because their shape is the wrong shape for our photos, and it makes them much harder to shoot and create interesting images from. But I like this shot. I like the pipefish. It's a very, very beautiful fish, and yeah, nice to celebrate a species I often ignore. A couple of shots of Banggais. This one is taken they're both taken with a 90. And again, this one is with that special effect filter. And you can see how it gives quite a different effect on this Banggai to it does on the other subjects. So, it is something that gives you a different effect depending on where the subject is in the frame and also the nature of the patterning on the subject. And then there's just a more standard shot of a Banggai. I really liked how the anemone looked in this picture. I think probably this picture needs a little bit more processing work. I think it's a little bit flat, a little bit greeny, actually. So I might go back and process this one before I finally sign it off, to go to agents and go on my website and things like that. But I really like the way the depth of field is on the anemone, with these out of focus tentacles at the beginning, then some in focus tentacles, and obviously an in focus subject, and then out of focus tentacles behind. I love the perspective that gives, and I think it's got a really nice feel, that image. Simple image, but got a nice feeling. Another picture that scores well on bokeh. This is a young giant frogfish. It was the size of a painted frogfish, but you could sort of see from its look, it was a giant frogfish. And this one was posing next to, or living next to, a crinoid. And I realised on the dive that you could, if you shot this one with a relatively open aperture, you could get a nice bokeh effect from the crinoid. I don't think I opened up all the way on this one. I kind of wanted it still to feel a bit more reality. Yeah, so I shot this at f4.5, and that goes back to sort of my well-known picture of the ghost pipefish with the crinoid, where I didn't go for out-and-out bokeh. I wanted the bokeh to be traceable back to the subject matter that it really is. Well, it's very common that underwater photographers use bokeh patterns in underwater photography these days, but I would say 95 or to 100% of them are nearly always with artificial backgrounds to create the bokeh. And so I think if you are a photographer who doesn't want to use those artificial backgrounds and you want to create beautiful bokeh but out of natural elements in your pictures, I feel it's good to not go all in on the bokeh, but allow the viewer to understand the natural element. And I think in this one, in fact, you can see the stalk of the crinoid. For me, at least, gives a feeling of what's creating that bokeh. It's not an artificial background. It's actually just the environment where this guy was living, just photographed in a thoughtful way. This is a picture of a very young ghost goby on Botuloides sea squirts, these colonial sea squirts that make these beautiful patterns. I was drawn to this just to photograph the pattern of the sea squirt, and then I spotted this very tiny, obviously newly settled ghost goby. It was still predominantly translucent, and I was able to find a shot and get it into the picture, which was really nice, and fill the whole frame with the pattern, which was quite a challenge because it was, it's quite a high magnification shot, and these incrustations of the sea squirts are not very big, so you needed everything to line up for that one to come together. Not very far away from that one was this beautiful frogfish. I photographed this frogfish quite a lot. I think it was the most handsome frogfish we had in Lembeh during the trip, just because it had these beautiful sort of sponge aperture pattern across its body. And I really enjoyed the chance to shoot that and see this. I still need to go through these pictures properly because I'm not convinced this is the best shot by any means. And these are the best shot in the 90mm. Just a nudibranch portrait. I don't think you need to zoom in on this one. Just a sort of standard shot. Not shot with the snoot, although it looks just like snoot lighting, but actually probably the uplighting on its chest shows you that it's not a snoot image. And then our next picture is another shot, probably on the same dive because they're just these are in sequential order, and these both from a night dive at Nudie Falls. We night dived there a lot on this trip just because the Lembeh Strait was really empty when we were there because of the volcano. So sites like Nudie Falls, which are often very requested, and I always joke that's mainly because it's got an English name rather than an Indonesian name. I don't think you get quite so many requests for what is Papusan Kecil. I can't even say it myself, so I'm not going to be requesting it, or whatever it is. I think it's the you always get more requests for the English name sites, and Nudie Falls is always a great dive, and we enjoyed diving there a lot at night because it was nice and quiet, and the tides were good for diving it at night during our trip, so it was nice and protected, and we were able to get lots of good, rich, and reefy photographic opportunities there with this little Dromia crab. This is a sponge crab. He's got a great hat on him. Always looks like a kind of a Rastafarian with one of those big woolly hats that Rastafarians often wear to keep all their dreadlocks in check. So yeah, I like these guys. I always like sponge crabs. This is an EMWL shot of an octopus with its shell. I like the pose of the octopus in this picture very much, the coconut octopus or veined octopus. I don't think the shell comes through as well in this frame. And I spent a lot of time photographing these octopus, both with the EMWL and with the 50mm with the domed curved port. And I need to go through these properly and choose the right ones. I just processed that one out for a talk, and I need to remind myself that I didn't choose necessarily the best shots. I just chose one quite quickly because I had a talk to give. This is another shot with the 50mm macro lens, which I did enjoy using on these more static subjects, and I like the ability to create interesting lighting and interesting compositions with that slightly wider viewing macro lens. The Sony 50mm, just in case anyone's interested, is not a lens that I would recommend for any sort of reef photography. But as soon as you have static subjects, it can be very good. It's very slow focusing. It really struggles to deal with a subject matter that's moving. But if you have stationary subjects, it's very sharp and it's very good. And I love the wider view of it. It's a great macro lens as long as the subject isn't moving. And all these shots here are all taken with the 50mm. This is with the dome port. This is quite a big frogfish, but very, very in the sort of wheelhouse of the 50mm. This size of subject. Really nice. You can get really close, even in murky conditions, get a nice clean image of the subject. And this frogfish had lots of attitude. And I've got lots of really nice pictures of it. And again, I feel bad just showing one because there's so many interesting ones to show. And then it's great for these slightly bigger subjects. This was quite a small coconut octopus, but it was a dive site. We had about 6 or 7 coconut octopuses on the slope, and the photographers were just moving backwards and forwards between them. So yeah, I took different shots at different times. And when I came over to this guy, he was sitting up nicely like this, looking around. I think because the photographer who'd been with him had left. And as I came back over across to him, he was like, "Oh, it's all nice and quiet." And I was able to get these nice shots of him sitting up proud, which is quite an unusual pose. And then this is actually the same one we just saw a minute ago in the EMWL shot. So that one and this one here are the same individual octopus, but photographed on different days. But this octopus was living in this old mollusk shell, this old snail shell. That was a very, very beautiful shell. I suspect he's been given that shell by a kind dive guide because it's such a beautiful shell. But he was loving living in it, and it gave some really great photographic opportunities. And again, I have lots of shots of him. I need to work out which ones I want to process. I just again chose these relatively quickly for a talk. And then the final picture in this video is this image here of a giant frogfish in amongst a load of debris. Actually, it's a lot of fallen ropes on the Jahir site. This was underneath the mooring that not the mooring near to shore, but the mooring out a bit more in the middle of the bay that the sort of more commercial non-diving boats use. Often you get a couple of at night. You get a couple of big sort of cargo, also medium-sized cargo ships tied up there. But underneath that buoy, there's kind of a debris of old sunken bits of rope and other bits of debris and weights probably and that sort of thing. And this frogfish was living right in the middle of all of it. And he wasn't easy to see, but I could slide the EMWL into this space, and it gave a really great perspective. I really like the shading and the surroundings. Frogfish pictures after a while become a bit samey, particularly with the EMWL, and I like this picture of it in its environment. It's not the most pretty environment, but it's a very typical frogfish environment, and I rather like this shot. The feeling of the frame within the frame with the dark overhead and the view through with particularly that damselfish in the background draws my eye really nicely through the frame. Oh, and it was super dark when I was shooting this, and because I wasn't that close, I opened the aperture up, and that's something I think technically I hadn't been doing before with the EMWL. I was so used to shooting the EMWL at f16, f18, f20, and it's a good reminder that when you're not shooting at those when you're not really, really close to the subject and you back away a bit, then you should open up the aperture just a little bit, maybe not as much as f9, but certainly to f11, f13 area to get which will give you more light and make it easier to shoot. Even though I was at ISO 640 and at f9, I was still on an 1/8 of a second to get that blue background to come through. So it was still quite a dark place to be taking pictures. Hopefully that was an interesting run through, and as long as I get a chance to process some pictures, I'll be back again soon with another episode. Bye bye.